What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Necromancer healer. The Necromancer healer is something that seems a little bit contradictory just from the fact that you're a Necromancer and apparently you're now healing people rather than raising them from the dead. So from kind of juxtaposition, it's pretty interesting how the two words kind of meld together, but from an actual gameplay perspective, Necromancer healers are actually pretty decent overall. They do have several unique synergies, so they do bring something to the table. They don't really have any sort of buffs to provide, unlike the other 5 classes in the game. So Necromancers don't really provide all too much in terms of unique debuffs and buffs from their normal abilities. Obviously with the Colossus ultimate, they do bring in major vulnerability, but as a support role, you're probably better suited running something like Warhorn instead, so that's a little bit iffy there for Necromancer support roles. So Necromancer healers are kind of in this weird middle ground where they're not really the top end healers like Templars and Wardens, but they're also not considered quite as bad as, for example, DKs are, because they do have some unique synergies and they do bring a little bit to the table that way. So, like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you basically need to know to recreate this build yourself. I will be discussing all the various skills and sets you're going to want to have on hand as a healer. You're a support role, so naturally that means your job is to support the group, and that will involve having different sets and being able to use different skills depending on the specific fight and the specific nature of the group itself, whether you're a progression guild or you're running for score or weekly leaderboard run. And because we are a support role, we don't have DPS parts, so instead I'll be kind of discussing a little bit behind the philosophy of healing, kind of what you should be focusing in on as a healer. And hopefully at some point I'll be able to get some gameplay. There might be some gameplay out there already from other streamers who already have a Necromancer healer in high-end PvE content. So I will have some links in the description below to a couple of those streamers who you can keep an eye on to see whether they end up using a Necromancer healer at any point in their trial guilds. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is just one of many different combinations that you're going to want to have on hand. I will be discussing in length all the different sets you should have on hand, where they're best suited, and whether you want to wear them on the body, on the front bar, things like that. In terms of Monster Helm sets, there are only a handful of Monster Helm sets that are going to be useful for healers. The first one that we have here is Bogdan, which is pretty much a super powerful healing Monster Helm set. So if you're really going for just raw healing potential, Bogdan is the one to go for. This comes from Elden Hollow 2. So this is a base game set, so don't need to worry about getting any DLCs in order to grab this set here. So one thing I do want to point out here, that even though it does seem like it has a low chance to proc, 5% chance on the tooltip, it is with each individual heal. So any sort of AoE heals, everybody you heal within an AoE has a chance to proc Bogdan, so it actually does have a fairly good uptime, even though the proc chance is only 5%. Moving on to our body set, we're running Perfected Olorime. So Olorime has largely supplanted Spell Power Cure in terms of the source of Major Courage. Much better than Spell Power Cure, much more consistent than Spell Power Cure. I had the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version if you would like. It's kind of up to you whether you're able to get the perfect version or not. So Olorime comes from Cloud Rest. The perfect version comes from Veteran Cloud Rest, the +1, +2, and +3 configurations. So if you can't get a consistent team to clear +1, +2, or +3, then you have to stick with the imperfect version of Olorime. The main difference is the loss of the Max Magicka on that 5-piece. So very, very important set to have on hand for PvE content. Even with pug groups, Olorime definitely outmatches Spell Power Cure. Several ESO creators, several ESO endgame healers have done plenty of videos explaining why Olorime is better than Spell Power Cure, so I will not go into it too in depth here. So I would recommend checking out some of those videos. I have one myself on my channel if you're interested in the rationale behind why Olorime over Spell Power Cure. The other set that we have is going to be Infallible Aether. This is a base game set which you can get from any of the 3 Craglorn trials. So even though it looks like a DPS set, the 5-piece is better suited on a healer. So your heavy attacks deal a certain amount of additional damage, and enemies you damage with a fully charged heavy attack are afflicted with minor vulnerability for 10 seconds. This is the most consistent source of minor vulnerability in the game right now. Nightblade off tanks and Nightblade healers can also bring vulnerability through their teleport strike move, but this is going to be far more consistent. I should say far more consistent, but it will be more consistent, and it's going to be a little bit safer than having to use teleport strike every 8 seconds. Now, while the wording says fully charged heavy attacks, as long as you start to channel a heavy attack, whether that's on your restoration staff or your lightning staff, you will be able to apply the debuff. So even though it says fully charged, it doesn't need to be a fully charged heavy attack here. So for our weapons, Restoration Staff front bar, Lightning Staff back bar, nothing much has changed too much here. We have double Infused here, but there are a couple of other trait options you can choose from for both your Restoration Staff and your Destruction Staff. For Destruction Staff, Infused is by far the best option. There is an argument for using a charged Lightning Staff, but generally speaking, Infused is going to be better. It provides a little bit more DPS, and charged, you can just put it on your front bar instead in order to get the charged benefits to the additional chance to proc concuss to the shock damage enchant. So you can go with like an Infused back bar and a charged front bar here. For the Restoration Staff, Infused is also a really good option here, particularly if you are the one responsible for applying the Crusher enchant. Some groups have shifted from putting Crusher on your healers rather than your tanks, so just keep that in mind. It's not going to be best for every group, but it is something you want to keep in mind. Keep on hand, I should say. Other potential options include Powered for additional healing strength, Nirn for additional spell power, which boosts both healing and damage. Go with Defending if you need a little bit of additional survivability. You can go with Decisive if you want more ultimate generation. You can go with Charged, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a shock damage glyph on your back bar to improve the chances of proccing concussed while you're on your front bar. So a lot of options for your healing staff trait. Now in terms of enchants, you already have the Crusher enchant, as I mentioned here. You can also go with an Absorb Magicka enchant to help you out with your sustain. You can go with a Weakening enchant to decrease the damage that the boss does with its attack to everybody, all your friends. So you have a few options with your enchants as well. Jewelry traits and enchants. So you have basically two, arguably three options when it comes to jewelry enchants. So you have Magicka regen, like I have here, or you have spell damage. And the third option is going to be potion cooldown glyphs, which basically reduces the cooldown of your potions by 5 seconds each as a base. It just allows you to drink potions more frequently, so you get better sustain by drinking more potions that way. Now in terms of traits, you have a few options, but most healers are sticking with Arcane for additional Magicka resources. It just gives you a little bit more resource to play around with, better sustain, and it also improves the strength of your overall heals. So a lot of healers are sticking with Arcane, but there is an argument to be made for Infused as well. Infused is great because it also improves your enchant strength, so you kind of have those two primary options there to play around with in terms of jewelry traits. Now for armor traits, you kind of have two camps here, very similar to tanking and armor traits for tanks. There is the Divines on small pieces, Infused on large pieces, which I think is actually most healers, most endgame healers, but there is also a argument to be made for going with all Divines as well. So I personally like Infused on my large pieces and Divines on my small pieces, and I have Max Magicka enchants on my small pieces and Prismatic enchants on my large pieces. I also like to go 5-1-1, so 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium. However, there are arguments for going 6-1, 6 light, 1 heavy, and also 7-0, which is just all light armor. So it really depends on your sustain level. So the more light armors you have, the better your sustain is going to be because of your light armor passives. But as a trade-off, you're also losing max health, max stamina, and max magicka by doing so. So really depends on how well you're able to sustain. If you can do 5-1-1, I certainly recommend doing so because you do get a little bit more max magicka, a little bit more max health to help out your survivability and your healing power. Now, in terms of other armor sets you're going to want to have on hand, as well as unique restoration staffs. Let's go over restoration staffs first, just because it is first on the list here. So you have the Master's Restoration Staff, the Asylum's Perfected Restoration Staff, you have the Black Rose Perfected Restoration Staff, and you have the Maelstrom Restoration Staff. So starting off first with the Asylum Restoration Staff. So this, whenever you cast Blessing or Protection, the cost of your Magicka and Stamina healing abilities are reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. Now, you do need to finish Asylum on hard mode, so that's +2 in order to get the perfected version of the staff, or you can get this as a weekly leaderboard reward from when Asylum is the weekly. Otherwise, you can just run just normal Asylum to get the regular plain Asylum Restoration Staff, which is reduced by 27% rather than 30% like you have here. Regardless, both staves are pretty good, so Blessing and Protection is also known as Combat Prayer, so it basically gives you a little bit more sustain. A lot of healers do Combat Prayer and then 2 Orbs, because that way you get some reduced cost on Orbs, which is typically speaking going to be your most expensive healing ability. Now, besides the Asylum Staff, you also have the Black Rose Perfected Restoration Staff, which is not used very often. It has more of a niche use, but in those niches, it's actually pretty strong. So you need to get this from Veteran Black Rose Prison. The normal Black Rose Prison will drop the normal version of the staff here, which just lacks that Magicka regen on the 2-piece there. Steadfast Ward applies major vitality to your target for 3 seconds, increasing the healing taken on your target by 30%. So really, really strong in certain niche scenarios. For example, like Kestis in the Ice Prison in order to heal somebody up to full, Cloud Rest to help deal with Baneful Mark. Those are instances where the Black Rose Restoration Staff really shines through. In those niches, it's really, really strong. But outside of those niches, it's relatively mediocre in comparison. So I would recommend trying to get it, but it's not a high priority set in order to grab. Next, we have the Master's Restoration Staff. This comes from Dragonstar Arena, so this is a base game staff that you can get here. There is no perfect version, it's just one version of the staff. Initial heal of Grand Healing restores 258 stamina to you and your allies affected. Now, in the past, this used to be a pretty strong heal back when Energy Orb was not quite as strong as it used to be. But with Energy Orb being your primary heal now, the Master's Restoration Staff has lost a bit of power overall because you're no longer using Illustrious Healing or Healing Springs as your primary source of healing. So now, Master's Restoration Staff is not used all too often. Where it is used in kind of stamina DPS heavy groups in order to get more sustain out to the group. But again, because Orbs are a little bit stronger in terms of raw healing power, the Master's Restoration Staff is kind of a relic of the past, so to speak. Finally, we do have the Maelstrom Restoration Staff. So the Maelstrom Restoration Staff, you do need to do Maelstrom Arena in order to get this set. So you will need to be able to do the Maelstrom Arena on Vet in order to grab it. So no way you can buy this for the carrier or anything like that. You have to do this by yourself. So whenever you critically heal with regeneration, you restore 800 Magicka. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. So again, niche scenarios only. There's not many instances in trials where you're going to be using regeneration, or I should say mutagen or rapid regen, but there are a few fights where you could potentially use this. So for example, Kite Healing in Cloud Rest is one instance where you might want to use mutagen. So in that instance, the Maelstrom Restoration Staff is pretty useful for your overall sustain. Pretty much fits that same role as the Asylum Restoration Staff, which basically focuses in on maximizing your sustain. Those are the 4 different unique Restoration Staff. So you can just run this on the front bar here, then you can run one set on the back bar here, which is going to be a proc set. So like Infallible Aether or Olorime, those are good sets to run in combination with these unique restoration staves. Now, in terms of sets you're going to want to wear as an actual healer, let's go ahead and go through them one by one. So the first one I want to talk about here that I already pulled out is going to be, pull it up here, it's going to be Nahviintaas. Nahviintaas. This comes from the newest trial, Sunspire, so you do need to have access to the Elsweyr deals expansion in order to grab this set. So there is an imperfect version as well, so the imperfect version drops from normal Sunspire, the perfected version drops from veteran Sunspire. No need to do hard modes for the perfected versions, it's just normal vet. Difference is that 1096 max Magicka bonus. So when an ally activates one of your synergies, you and the ally who activated the synergy get 12% cost reduction for non-ultimate abilities for 3 seconds. This effect can occur every 6 seconds per target. So you can combine this with Worm or Hircine's Veneer, both of which are additional cost reduction sets. So you don't necessarily need to use this in place of Worm or Hircine's, and that's what makes it very strong. When you combine it with Worm, when you combine it with Hircine's, it ends up being a very, very large cost reduction to whoever uses the synergy. You will always get that cost reduction because you're typically going to be the one pumping out the most synergies out with Orbs, with Shards, with your class synergies. So Nahviintaas is really, really great, not just for your healer sustain, but also for the group sustain as well. It's not particularly all that great if you take in consideration the duration of the cost reduction and the cooldown. It's not fantastic, but it is still very useful. It also comes with Minor Aegis, which helps out your survivability as well. Now, in terms of other sets that you're going to want to have on hand, we're going to start off first with any dungeon set. So there are a few dungeon sets you're going to want to pick up. First one's going to be Sanctuary. This is a niche use set. So basically it comes from Banished Cells, base game set, that increases the healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. The big drawback of Sanctuary is the fact that it's actually quite easy in this game to overheal. So overhealing basically means you're healing for more than the amount of health that's missing. So let's say your healing springs, this is just an example, heals for 5,000 per tick, and the people you're healing are missing between 2,000 and 3,000 health. The extra 3,000 to 2,000 health that is part of your 5,000 healing tick is basically wasted. So overhealing is a big, really easy to do in this game, so you don't really need any sort of additional healing received in most scenarios. The other downside of Sanctuary is also that 10-meter radius. It's actually fairly small compared to other sets like Worm and Herseens that have a 28-meter radius. So you do still want to pick this up because there are some fights, particularly in progression guilds, where you're going to want to run Sanctuary. So Cloud Rest is a great example of this. If Locustes, for the ice prisons, they heal people up to full, it might be a good idea to have Sanctuary on a healer there in order to kind of get them up to full faster so they don't die. So definitely a set you want to have on hand, but don't anticipate using this all too much. The next set is going to be Worm. This comes from Vault of Madness, another base game set, and this reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. So if you have all stamina DPS, then Worm is obviously not going to be very useful to you, but if you have Magicka DPS, then Worm is a set you're probably going to want to wear for the additional sustain. And then finally, you have Jorvuld's Guidance. This comes from Scale Colored Peak, so you do need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to get this set. This increases the duration of your major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. So, as a Necromancer, this does not impact the duration of major vulnerability because that is a debuff, and you're obviously not applying it to yourself or your allies. But it does affect Major Force from Warhorn, so it does boost the duration of Major Force by that 40%. So instead of 9.5 seconds, you get 13.3 seconds instead. So, greater Major Force uptime, more DPS that way. So overall, it's a nice set to run. You'll see this used pretty often in progression style groups. You get that additional major buff from Major Force. Less used in score running guilds just because they have a little bit weird set combinations there, but it's definitely a set you're going to want to pick up here. Now going over to overland sets, I don't believe there's any overland sets that you're going to want to hold on to as a healer. Perhaps there is one. Really quickly, so there's not really any overland sets that you're going to want to hold on to as a healer. Most of these sets are geared more towards DPS rather than healing, so there's not that many overland sets you're going to have on hand. Now in terms of trial sets, there are a handful here that you're going to want to pick up. So Healing Mage, also known as Mending, comes from Ethereal Archive. So a base game set, when you use an Area of Effect heal ability, you reduce the weapon damage of all enemies within 10 meters of you by 430 for 3 seconds. Now while it does say weapon damage, PvE mobs, bosses, mobs, trash pulls, they all use one statistic to calculate out their damage. So even though it says weapon damage, it'll reduce damage for all PvE incoming damage. So it is a little bit limiting because you do need to be within 10 meters and it only lasts for 3 seconds. The good thing is pretty much most heals in the game are considered Area of Effect heals, so they will proc Mending that way. So don't need to worry too much about proccing it. It's mostly about getting within range in order to proc Mending. 10 meters radius, pretty small, you have to be within melee range, but it's very, very helpful for progression guilds in order to reduce damage. Now it will not reduce certain damage like environmental damage, so for example on Rakat hard mode, Mending is not particularly useful because most of the damage you're taking is not actually considered from Rakat, so Mending doesn't actually affect the damage of those mechanics. Just keep that in mind when you decide to use Healing Mage or not. And that is pretty much it in terms of healing sets. There is one final healing set that you may or may not need to wear. This is really dependent on the group, and most high-end groups are running this. Some progression groups are not, and that's going to be Torok's Pact. So this is a crafted set, 3 traits, and it is a base game set, so it comes from the second zone of each of your alliances. It decreases the weapon enchant cooldown and increases the potency of your weapon enchant by 30%. So like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about enchants on your weapons, some groups are having your healers run Crusher instead of on the tanks. In those instances, running Torag's Pact is going to be more beneficial that way. So Torag's Pact, really very more sort of min-maxing, less so for progression. Some progression guilds are running Torag's Pact on their healers. Again, it all depends on whether they have shifted Crusher from their tanks to the healers or not. So just play it by ear, ask your raid lead whether you need Torag's Pact or not. Now those are all the sets that you're going to want to have on hand as a healer. Now in terms of Monster Helm sets, before we move on, there are another couple of Monster Helm sets you're going to want to have on hand besides Bogdan. The first one is going to be Asylum Rkugamz. This is a base game set from Darkshade Caverns 1. When you heal yourself or an ally, you have 10% chance to summon a Dormer Spider that heals for 1206 health and restores 524 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters every second for 8 seconds. A little bit less of a heal than compared to Bogdan's, even when you consider the additional 4% healing done bonus. But it makes up for that loss in healing strength with stamina return instead. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, then Sentinel Rkugamz is very nice for their overall sustain. Other sets, Monster Helm sets you're going to want to have on hand. Troll King, a pretty niche set, so when you heal yourself or an ally, if they are still below 50% health, their health recovery is increased by 1548 for 10 seconds. This is a base game set from Blessed Crucible, and it's very niche, so health regen in general, not particularly useful in most content in most scenarios, but there are a few fights where Troll King is pretty strong. Those are going to be Cloud Rest and Lakestes in Sunspire. The commonality between those two fights, so for Cloud Rest, it's going to be to help combat Baneful Mark and Execute, and for Lakestes, it's going to be combating Ice Prison. Both of those apply a defile, basically a reduction in healing received on whoever is affected by either Baneful Mark or Ice Prison, but for some reason health regen is not affected by that same reduction. So in that instance, Troll King is going to be your friend here because it basically acts as an additional 1548 heal every 2 seconds with Troll King. It's very easy to proc because they have that reduction in healing received. Definitely a set you want to have on hand, but don't anticipate using it all too often. Finally, already pulled it out. Yes, I did. The last Monster Helm set you're going to want to have on hand is going to be Symphony of Blades. So this comes from Depth of Maltar, so you do need to have access to Wrathstone in order to farm this set. When you heal an ally who's under 50% of their primary resource, in this case, primary resource refers to Magicka or Stamina, you grant them Meridia's Favor, restoring 20 through 25 of their highest resource, Magicka or Stamina, every second for 6 seconds. So really, really nice for sustain. Yes, it is a great set, especially when you combine it with a lot of other support roles running Symphony of Blades. You cannot progress on yourself, you can only progress on other people, but that's kind of what you want to do. As a healer, you shouldn't have any issues with sustain. You should be more about supporting DPS and tanks with their sustain instead. And obviously you're healing everybody because you're the healer, so it's pretty easy to get this to proc on a cooldown in order to help out your DPS sustain a little bit better. Those are all the sets you're going to have on hand as a healer, and I have them all listed down in the description below. Onward to our character sheet. So I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are not necessarily the best race, but they're a pretty good race for healing overall. So the best race is arguably going to be either Bretons or Argonians for healers. So Bretons get 2000 max Magicka and they get 7% cost reduction to all Magicka abilities as well as 100 additional Magicka regen. So really super sustain heavy. Pretty much never have to worry about I shouldn't say never, but it's really hard to push your Magicka to its limits as a Breton. You can really go all out as a healer, as a Breton, without really concern too much over your sustain. Gonians, on the other hand, they get, I believe, 1000 max health, 1000 max Magicka. They get 4000 Magicka health and stamina whenever they drink a potion, no matter what potion, so increase your overall sustain. Plus they get, I believe it is 7% additional healing done. So in terms of raw healing strength, Argonians are going to be one of the best races out there. Now you can go with any of the other magically inclined races, so for example High Elves, Dark Elves like I have here, for the max Magicka and spell damage bonus, but generally speaking Breton is widely regarded to be one of the best races, with Argonians close behind. For our attributes, we have 64 points into Magicka. Now Necromancers do have the Last Gasp passive, which gives them additional 1250 max health. We don't really need to worry too much about speccing that many points into health, if at all. You can do so if you so desire, but with Prismatic enchants, with the Last Gasp passive, you don't really need to do so. We're running regen food right now, gold food, has lower max health than Orbs Graduate Frothgar, as well as Bystat food, and we're still sitting at 19,000 1,246 health, with before Evan and before minor toughness, so you really no need to put any points into health. In terms of Mundus, we're going with the Atronach for the additional Magicka regen. You could also go with the Ritual for the additional healing done. This is all going to be really depending on your regen and your spell damage. So generally speaking, my personal rule of thumb is try to get as close as you can to 2,000 on both spell damage and Magicka regen. So play around with your jewelry enchants to kind of meet that goal before you have any of your buffs here. So using the Atronach as your Mundus allows you to spec a little bit more heavily into spell damage, versus the Ritual, which allows you to spec a little bit more heavily into Magicka regen. So that's kind of the trade-offs there that you make with either Mundus stone. I personally like the Atronach for the additional regen, and just make up for the spell damage by putting in a couple of more spell damage glyphs that way. We are a vampire for the 10% additional Magicka regen and stamina regen, as well as the undeath passive, which is some additional mitigation when we're below 50% health. Just bear in mind that you will take more damage from fire, so for those fire damage, just make sure you have a shield or you're healing yourself through any sort of fire damage that you're taking. And we are running old food, Clockwork Citrus Fillet here. We get the max health, we get the max Magicka, and we get the Magicka regen as well. So really, really strong food. You can also run Witch Mother's Potent Brew if you'd like, but Clockwork Citrus Fillet has better stats because it is gold food compared to purple food with Witch Mother's Potent Brew. You can also run Orzger's Red Frothgar if you'd like. That gives you just max health and more Magicka regen, but you will miss out on the max Magicka if you are running Orzger's Red Frothgar. Now for our skills. On our front bar, this is the Resto staff bar, we have Blood Sacrifice, Illustrious Healing, Combat Prayer, Energy Orbs, Necrotic Potency, and Glacial Colossus. On our back bar, we have Elemental Drain, Unnerving Boneyard, Blockade of Storms, Intensive Mender, Braided Tether, and Aggressive Warhorn. Now you do have a couple of flex options that you definitely want to have on hand. So in terms of burst healing, you have two options when it comes to burst healing. First option is going to be Blood Sacrifice. So this is going to be your burst heal. It does apply Minor Defile onto you, which reduces your healing received by 15% for 4 seconds every time you use it. So just keep that in mind if you're using Blood Sacrifice. It's not necessarily something you can spam per se, but Minor Defile is not really that bad in PvE. The other option for your burst heal is going to be either Renewing Undeath or Enduring Undeath. You can go with either morph here. So Renewing Undeath removes negative effects if it consumes a corpse. Enduring Undeath provides a heal over time when it consumes a corpse. Now the benefit of Renewing Undeath and Enduring Undeath is the fact that it's an AoE heal. So you're able to heal more than one person this way, even though the heal itself is going to be weaker. So just keep in mind that it does have a heal over time component associated with it. Both morphs have that heal over time. The Enduring Undeath one is just a lot stronger because it can consume more corpses. So in terms of overall heal, it does end up healing a little bit more than Blood Sacrifice does in terms of raw healing done. But Blood Sacrifice or Resistant Flesh, either morph, is a stronger burst heal for a single target. So I like Blood Sacrifice because it allows you to heal a second target if it consumes a corpse, but there's an argument to be made for Resistant Flesh as well, so that basically gives them some additional resistances, equal to half of the amount healed, and it does stack with your resistance buff, so Ward and Resolve, and you're healing for a lot, so you're giving them a lot of resistances. The downside of running Resistant Flesh, though, is the fact that it is a pretty small duration, only 3 seconds, so I prefer to get that chance of a secondary heal with Blood Sacrifice instead. In terms of Intensive Mender on the back bar, so I like this because it gives you a lot stronger heal, so 6,223 compared to Spirit Guardian, which only heals for 2,140 but lasts twice as long. So it's basically Intensive Mending does 3 times as much heal but lasts for twice as long. So in terms of raw healing potential, it's stronger than Spirit Guardian. It also lasts for a shorter period of time, so it produces more corpses than Spirit Guardian does. That's why we're using Intensive Mender rather than Spirit Guardian, even though Spirit Guardian is better for personal survivability because it does take 10% of the damage that you take. Now in terms of Braided Tether versus Mortal Coil returns stamina. Braided Tether gives you an AoE heal, so you have a little bit of an argument for both. The stamina return is going to be helpful even though you are a Magicka healer, you're relying on Magicka in order for break freeze, dodge rolling, things like that, but Braided Tether is better in terms of just pure healing, especially when you're stacked up like this. Other flexibilities you want to have on hand. Agony Totem has a additional synergy, so a unique synergy on top of Unnerving Boneyard. It does require you to be within melee range. It only has a 6-meter radius and it is centered on the cast itself, so you need to be basically right on top of the DPS group in order to provide a synergy, or the off tank or the main tank in order to give them the synergy. But it is another additional synergy, and for trash pulls, the AoE minor vulnerability is pretty nice to have, so definitely have this on hand, especially for trash pulls. And under Grave Lord, you could, if you need the additional Magicka sustain, also run Mystic Siphon. This returns Magicka and deals some damage, but as a healer, you don't really need additional Magicka sustain with Mystic Siphon. You don't really need to run this skill at all if you don't want to. Other potential flex options you want to have on hand, depending on whether you run the Maelstrom's Restoration Staff, you can run Mutagen, so this is more useful for 4-man content, but there are a couple of fights and trials where you can run Mutagen or Rapid Regen. Then Steadfast Ward, Healing Ward, or Ward Ally if you're running the Black Rose Prison Staff. So if you are running it, you obviously want to have one of these two morphs here. I like to have Ward Ally for the shield, but you can also go with Healing Ward as well. If you need a shield, you can run either Morph Annulment, Harness Magic, or Dampen Magic. It's up to you which one you want to run. Other than that, there's not much else. Mend Spirit under the Psijic skill line, if you have access to the Psijic Order skill tree, is actually a really nice heal. The light attacks heal for pretty nice amount here, 3214. The heavy attacks give you not only just heal, but they also return Magicka as well. Mend Spirit gives the ally major ward mage resolve as well, so very nice if they don't have a source of that. A lot better now than it was in the past here. It is a toggleable, and it's a lot smoother to weave now, so definitely something I'd recommend picking up as a healer. And on the Indulgent skill line, pretty much all of them except for perhaps Inner Rage you want to have on hand. So Overflowing Altar for the Meta Lifesteal, as well as the Blood Altar synergy for the heal. Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy, even though it has been nerfed, or I should say changed, it's still a really strong synergy for both Magicka and Stamina DPS. Bone Surge, one for the shield, but mainly for the major vitality in certain fights, particularly Cloud Rest. And obviously we have Energy Orb for the Combustion synergy. You should be running that anyways. Now the Alliance War, you need a Purge, an AoE Purge. You can run Efficient Purge here. So this is a little bit more expensive to run compared to the Personal Purge that you could run, which is Expunge and Modify. But it's kind of up to you which one you want to run. If you just need a Personal Purge, and you run Expunge and Modify, because you're a healer, you will typically be running Purge instead of this Expunge and Modify ability here. So definitely pick up Purge, and if you don't want to run a Colossus on the front bar, you can also run Replenishing Barrier on the front bar for the additional Magicka regen you get from Magicka Aid. Moving on to our champion points. CP cap's not changed, it's still 810, gives us 270 points put across our different constellation colors. With our green CPs, 100 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity, that gives us 95 points, while I have 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. Play around with green CPs if you'd like. You can drop Arcanist down to 75, for example, if you want to get some more points back, or you can increase Tenacity up to 100 and lose 25 points to put into the other nodes that way. For blue CPs, in terms of raw healing, so this character is just going to be for healing as you're not DPSing on the side. 100 Bless, 100 Elfborn are the only two things that matter. The other nodes are more focused in on DPS, so it's not quite as important. For example, I have 27 LE Expert, 12 Spell Erosion, and 31 Thaumaturge, but it doesn't really matter where you put those remaining 70 points. Finally, our red CPs. This is a more generalist approach, so this is going to give you decent mitigation across all pieces of content, but it doesn't necessarily maximize mitigation across any single piece of content. We have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's all of our build information. Also, now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy of healing. So, healers in ESO, guys might have heard me say support a lot when I'm talking about healing and tank, and that's because healers and tanks in ESO fall more under support, less so just raw potential healing power. I've already mentioned when we talked about Sanctuary that's very easy to overheal in ESO because of all the healing modifiers that we have on hand. So, in terms of just pure healing, yes, that's important as a healer, but your primary goal is really taking a look at buffing your allies, debuffing your enemies. So your first 3 primary goals as a healer. 1, heal people, make sure they don't die. 2nd, make sure you stay alive because you're a very important part of any organized group. And then once you master those 2, then you can move on to buffing and debuffing. But you will find that even in the process of healing, you actually are providing buffs and debuffs. So if go ahead and take a look at our front bar, for example. If you're running Combat Prayer, which you should, you're giving Minor Berserk, Minor Ward, and Minor Resolve, all of which are really nice buffs to have for your DPS. Combat Prayer also is a nice burst heal as well, so if you don't want to run Sacrifice, for example, you can also run Combat Prayer. It's a little bit weaker than Undeath, either Morph of Undeath, but it provides that Minor Berserk, so still a pretty decent AoE burst heal with Combat Prayer. And if you're running Orbs, Orbs is going to be your strongest healing ability in the game right now, in terms of just raw healing done per second. But it also provides Combustion Synergy, which returns resources to your DPS, your tank, whoever activates the synergy. So on top of the additional healing, you're also returning resources, so you're giving support to your DPS and tanks this way. So you can see here that a lot of the support is coming from just naturally healing. So again, Orbs, highest heals per second done in the game, and you're giving back resources that way. On your back bar for the Destruction Staff, you're looking at Blockade of Storms and Elemental Drain as your primary ways of supporting the group. So most of the stuff that I have on the back bar are mostly sort of heal over times or things you can activate once and sort of forget about. So Blockade of Storms is going to be important for setting off balance. So it's one of the best ways to set off balance. So just make sure to have Blockade of Storms down. This might not necessarily need to be run. It depends on whether the tank is also running Blockade of Storms, in which case you can swap this out for a different ability. And Ellie Drain for the Minor Magicka steal. If you do not have any Magicka DPS, then Ellie Drain is not going to be quite as important to run. Also, you don't necessarily need to run it on both healers, so if your other healer is running Ellie Drain, then you might not need to run Ellie Drain at all, so you can drop this for another ability that way. As for Unnerving Boneyard, this is for the synergy for Alkash uptime, so just make sure to drop this on top of the tank. But for Trash Pulls, this is also an AoE Major Breach and Major Fracture, so really nice to have on hand for that additional Breach and Fracture synergy. And then Intensive Mender and Braided Tether are, again, sort of like hit it and then you can forget it because it just kind of does its own thing here. That's sort of how I approach healing. Now, Necrotic Potency, Necromancers in general have very good ultimate generation if you're able to manage your corpses very well. Necrotic Potency grants 6 ultimate and heals yourself for every corpse that you get. Also reduces the damage you take, so that's a really nice additional passive there. But the main ability that is going to produce corpses is going to be Intensive Benders. This creates a corpse whenever the ghost expires or after 4 seconds if you recast it. So definitely keep an eye on your corpse management in order to use your different abilities. Obviously for Trash Pulls, you can also run Necrotic Potency here. In general, definitely try to make sure you have, you need to have a corpse in order to use Braided Tether. So just make sure you have that on there. In order to get the heal over time done. And then from there, if you have the tether active, then you can run Necrotic Potency for the additional ultimate generation to get more Warhorns. So it's really hard to describe healing without actually showing it to you guys, so I do not typically play healers in my Trials guilds, so I do have links in the description below to people who do stream healing and who are healer mains in endgame PvE. So below you'll find links to the streams for Tabata, Heals the Fields, Sophie, and I'm blanking on the last one as well. Style Animus, who all 4 of them are endgame PvE healers. So if you guys have any questions about healing, I highly recommend checking out their channels when they stream and asking them questions on their stream. Alternatively, you can also ask them here on this channel in the comment section of this video, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And if I can't answer them, then I'll try to find somebody who can answer them and get back to you guys with that. I hope you guys found this video informative, and as always, I will see you guys in the next dungeon.